Today, I'm going to show you exactly which 11 states are most likely to experience major blackouts in 2026, why it's happening, and most importantly, what you can actually do about it before you're sitting in the dark wondering why you didn't prepare. And I've spent the last month analyzing grid reliability reports, infrastructure assessments, and talking to utility insiders who paint a pretty alarming picture. The Department of Energy just released a report warning that blackouts could increase by 100 times, not percent times, by 2030 if we keep shutting down reliable power plants without building adequate replacements. That's not some conspiracy theory. That's our own government telling us the grid is falling apart. But here's what really got my attention. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation, which is basically the referee for our power grid, just issued their assessment showing that most of the United States is at elevated risk for electricity shortfalls. We're not talking about brief flickers. We're talking about extended blackouts during extreme weather when you need power the most. Now, before we dive into which states are in the most trouble, let me give you the 30,000 feet view of what's really happening here. Our power grid was built in the 1960s and 70s for a completely different world. Back then, we had big coal and nuclear plants pumping out steady, predictable power. Today, we're shutting those down and replacing them with solar panels and wind turbines that only work when nature cooperates. Meanwhile, we're plugging in millions of electric vehicles, running massive data centers for artificial intelligence, and everyone's mining cryptocurrency in their garage. The demand for electricity is exploding while the reliable supply is shrinking. It's basic math, and the math doesn't work. Let's start with number 11 on our list, and this one might surprise you. Michigan. Yeah, the Great Lakes state is facing a perfect storm of grid problems that most people don't see coming. Michigan's industrial base is transitioning hard into electric vehicle manufacturing. Ford, GM, Stellantis, they're all retooling factories to build EVs. And those factories are absolute electricity vampires. We're talking about facilities that use as much power as small cities. But here's the kicker. Michigan is simultaneously shutting down coal plants and a nuclear facility while betting everything on natural gas and renewables. The problem is, Michigan's natural gas infrastructure is ancient. Many of those pipelines were laid in the 1950s. When we get those polar vortex events and they're becoming more frequent, natural gas supplies get constrained because everyone needs it for heating. The gas plants can't get enough fuel to generate electricity right when demand peaks. I remember during the 2014 polar vortex, parts of Michigan came within hours of cascading blackouts. The utilities were literally calling industrial customers, begging them to shut down operations. Michigan also has this unique vulnerability because of the Great Lakes. Ice storms coming off the lakes can coat transmission lines with inches of ice. Back in 2023, I watched a video of transmission towers just crumbling under the weight like they were made of aluminum foil. When those long-distance transmission lines fail, entire regions lose power, and in winter conditions, repair crews can't even reach the damage for days. Number 10 is Louisiana. And if you think hurricanes are their only problem, you're missing the bigger picture. Louisiana's power grid is basically held together with duct tape and prayers. The state has some of the oldest power infrastructure in the nation, much of it dating back to the 1960s. But what really makes Louisiana vulnerable is their dependence on natural gas plants located in flood-prone areas. See, Louisiana produces tons of natural gas, but most of their power plants are built right in Hurricane Alley. When storms hit, it's not just the wind damage. Storm surge can flood entire generating facilities, and saltwater is absolutely devastating to electrical equipment. After Hurricane Ida, some areas were without power for over a month. Not because the lines were down, but because the actual power plants were destroyed. The heat and humidity in Louisiana are brutal on equipment year-round. Transformers, substations, all that infrastructure degrades faster in that environment. The utilities know this, but replacing everything would cost billions they don't have. So they're playing this constant game of patching things up and hoping nothing critical fails during peak summer demand when everyone's running their AC 24/7. What really worries me about Louisiana is their industrial load. All those petroleum refineries and chemical plants along the Mississippi, they need massive amounts of reliable power. When the grid becomes unstable, these facilities have to conduct emergency shutdowns, which can take weeks to restart. It creates this cascading effect where power problems become fuel shortages that affect the entire country. Now, by the way, because I know how overwhelming all this can feel when you're trying to figure out how to protect your family, I put together a free resource for you that I personally use. It's a complete guide that shows you exactly how to turn just $50 into a 90-day emergency food supply. I'm talking specific brands, exact quantities, where to buy everything. Plus, I included 37 essential items most people never think to stockpile. Number 23 on that list, it's something you probably throw away every week but could be incredibly valuable in a grid-down situation. The guide also shows you meals you can make with zero electricity, storage tricks that work even in small apartments, and how to scale up your supplies over time without breaking the bank. It's completely free. Just let me know where to send it. The link is in the description below. All right, number 9. And this is where things get interesting. Illinois. Chicago alone uses more electricity than many entire states, and Illinois has been aggressively shutting down coal plants without adequate replacements. The state is banking on wind power from rural areas. But here's what they don't tell you. The transmission lines needed to move that power to Chicago are completely inadequate. It's like trying to fill a swimming pool through a coffee straw. Illinois also has this nasty problem with polar vortex events. When temperatures drop to -20, electricity demand absolutely explodes as everyone cranks up their heating. But those same conditions often come with calm air, meaning wind turbines aren't generating anything. The natural gas plants try to pick up the slack, but the gas pipelines can't deliver enough fuel during extreme cold. It's a triple failure waiting to happen. I've been tracking Illinois' grid issues since 2018, and what concerns me most is their nuclear fleet. These plants provide about half the state's electricity, but they're old, expensive to maintain, and several are scheduled for retirement. Once those nuclear plants go offline, Illinois loses that steady baseline power that keeps the grid stable. Wind and solar can't replace that reliability, no matter what politicians promise. The cybersecurity threat to Illinois is also massive. Chicago is a major financial hub, making it a prime target for state-sponsored cyber attacks. The grid infrastructure there is increasingly digital and connected to the internet. A coordinated cyber attack during a weather event could create chaos that makes the 2003 Northeast blackout look like a minor inconvenience. Number 8 is Massachusetts. New England in general has serious grid problems, but Massachusetts is particularly vulnerable. The state has shut down nuclear and coal plants while blocking new natural gas pipelines for environmental reasons. That leaves them incredibly dependent on liquefied natural gas that comes by ship from overseas. When winter storms disrupt shipping or global LNG prices spike, Massachusetts literally can't get enough fuel to keep the lights on. The ISO New England grid operator has been warning about this for years. During cold snaps, they're often one pipeline failure or LNG shipment delay away from rolling blackouts. Back in 2022, they came so close to blackouts that they were preparing emergency protocols to cut power to neighborhoods on a rotating basis. Massachusetts also has this unique problem with offshore wind. They're building massive wind farms off Cape Cod, which sounds great until you realize that offshore transmission cables are incredibly vulnerable. One ship anchor dragging across the seafloor can knock out gigawatts of power instantly. The maintenance on these offshore systems is enormously complex and expensive, especially during winter storms when you need that power most. The demand side in Massachusetts is exploding too. The state is pushing hard for electric vehicle adoption and electric heating systems to replace oil and gas furnaces. But they're adding all this electrical demand without upgrading the distribution infrastructure. It's like putting a Ferrari engine in a golf cart. Something's going to break, and it's going to break catastrophically. Number 7 is New York. And I'm not just talking about New York City, though that's certainly the biggest vulnerability. The entire state has a grid that's hanging by a thread. New York has shut down the Indian Point nuclear plant that provided a quarter of New York City's power, replacing it with natural gas plants and promises of future renewables that haven't materialized. The transmission system bringing power from upstate to New York City is maxed out. Those high-voltage lines running through the Hudson Valley are operating at capacity during peak demand. One major transmission failure, which becomes more likely every year as equipment ages, could black out millions of people instantly. What really keeps me up at night about New York is the cascading failure potential. The grid is so interconnected and operating so close to its limits that small problems can trigger massive blackouts. Remember 2003 when a tree branch in Ohio caused 50 million people to lose power across the Northeast? New York's grid is even more vulnerable today because demand has grown while redundancy has decreased. New York City specifically has this terrifying scenario where extreme heat creates massive air conditioning demand, right? When the ancient underground distribution system is most likely to fail. Those underground cables and transformers weren't designed for current loads, and they literally cook themselves to death during heat waves. Coned has to do these preemptive shutoffs to prevent equipment from exploding, leaving tens of thousands without power when they need it most. Number 6 is Florida, and this isn't just about hurricanes, though those are certainly getting worse. Florida's real problem is explosive population growth combined with a grid that can't keep pace. The state is adding something like 1,000 new residents every single day, each one plugging in air conditioners, pool pumps, and electric vehicles. The heat and humidity in Florida are absolutely brutal on electrical equipment, transformers, substations, transmission lines. They all degrade faster in that environment. Salt air from the coast corrodes everything metal. The utilities are in this constant battle against nature, just to maintain what they have, let alone upgrade for growing demand. Florida's natural gas dependency is also a massive vulnerability. Most of the state's electricity comes from natural gas plants, and that gas has to flow through pipelines that cross hurricane zones. When storms damage those pipelines or the compression stations that keep gas flowing, power plants can't operate. It's not just the storm knocking down power lines, it's the entire generation system failing. What happened in 2022 with Hurricane Ian really opened my eyes. Even areas that didn't get direct hits lost power for weeks because the transmission system couldn't handle rerouting power around damaged areas. The grid just doesn't have enough redundancy. Florida Power and Light is trying to harden the system, but they're decades behind where they need to be. The cyber threat to Florida is also significant. The state has numerous military installations and critical infrastructure that make it a prime target. A coordinated cyber attack during hurricane season could turn a manageable natural disaster into a catastrophic grid failure lasting months. All right, number 5. And this one breaks my heart, because I love this state. Arizona. The Valley of the Sun is about to become the Valley of Darkness if they don't fix their grid problems fast. Phoenix is already one of the hottest cities in America, regularly hitting 115 degrees or higher in summer. But here's what's insane. They're adding hundreds of thousands of new residents while water supplies are dwindling and the power grid is maxed out. Arizona's relationship with air conditioning, even optional. It's survival. When the power goes out in Phoenix during summer, people literally die. The hospitals get overwhelmed. Emergency services can't keep up. We saw this during the 2020 heat waves when equipment failures caused rolling blackouts. The mortality rate spiked immediately. The state is heavily dependent on the Palo Verde nuclear plant, which is the largest power plant in the United States. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Palo Verde needs water for cooling, and it gets that water from treated wastewater from Phoenix. If there's a disruption to that water supply, which becomes more likely every year with drought conditions, that nuclear plant has to reduce output or shut down entirely. Imagine losing 2,000 megawatts of power right when temperatures hit 120 degrees. Arizona is also betting big on solar power, which makes sense in the desert, right? Except solar panels become less efficient as temperatures rise above about 77 degrees. When it's 115 degrees, those panels are operating at maybe 70% efficiency. And obviously, solar doesn't work at night when people are still running their AC full blast. The transmission infrastructure in Arizona is ancient and overloaded. Many of the main transmission lines were built in the 1960s and 70s. They're literally cooking in the desert sun, degrading faster than anywhere else in the country. The utilities know they need massive upgrades, but the cost would be astronomical. And guess who pays for that? Your electricity bill would double or triple. Number 4 is North Carolina. And this might surprise people who think of it as a stable state, but North Carolina has become ground zero for several converging grid threats that are about to collide spectacularly. The state has aggressively shut down coal plants while becoming increasingly dependent on natural gas and solar power. But here's the problem. North Carolina's natural gas pipeline capacity is completely inadequate for their growing needs. Duke Energy, which provides most of the state's power, has been warning that they're walking a tightrope between supply and demand. They're literally one pipeline disruption or extreme weather event away from massive shortfalls. The Colonial Pipeline cyber attack in 2021 was a wake-up call. If something similar happened to natural gas infrastructure, North Carolina would face immediate rolling blackouts. The state is also dealing with explosive growth in the research triangle in Charlotte areas. Tech companies, data centers, pharmaceutical manufacturers, they're all setting up shop and consuming enormous amounts of electricity. The grid infrastructure in these areas is racing to keep up, but falling further behind every year. What really worries me about North Carolina is the physical security threat. In 2022, someone attacked 2 substations in Moore County with rifles, knocking out power to 45,000 people for days. It showed how vulnerable the grid is to physical attacks. There are thousands of substations across North Carolina, most with just a chain-link fence for security. It would only take a coordinated attack on a handful of critical substations to black out major cities. Hurricane vulnerability in North Carolina is also getting worse. It's not just coastal areas anymore. Storms are maintaining strength further inland, causing catastrophic flooding in areas where the grid infrastructure wasn't built to handle it. When substations flood, they're not just offline for days, they're destroyed and need complete rebuilding. Number 3 is Texas. And honestly, this could easily be number 1. The lonier state stands alone with its own grid, ERCOT, that's isolated from the rest of the country. When things go wrong in Texas, and they go wrong a lot, there's no backup from neighboring states. They're completely on their own. And that independence is becoming a massive liability. We all remember February 2021 when the grid completely collapsed during a winter storm. Over 200 people died. Millions were without power for days in freezing temperatures. Pipes burst, causing billions in damage. The political finger-pointing afterward was epic. But here's what didn't change: the fundamental problems that caused that disaster. Texas has a deregulated market that prioritizes cheap electricity over reliable electricity. Power companies make money by cutting costs, not by building resilient infrastructure. There's no requirement to maintain reserve capacity for emergencies. It's literally designed to operate on the razor's edge between supply and demand. And when anything goes wrong, the whole system collapses. Summer is becoming just as dangerous as winter in Texas. The state regularly hits record electricity demand during heat waves. OT is constantly issuing conservation alerts, basically begging people not to use electricity so the grid doesn't collapse. That's not a sign of a healthy system. That's a system hanging by a thread. The renewable situation in Texas is particularly chaotic. They've built massive wind farms in West Texas, but the transmission lines to move that power to cities are completely inadequate. When the wind isn't blowing during peak demand, there's not enough backup power. Natural gas plants are supposed to fill the gap, but many aren't weatherized for extreme conditions. When you need the most, they fail. What really scares me about Texas is the population growth. Austin, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, they're all exploding with new residents. The demand for electricity is growing faster than anywhere else in the country, but the infrastructure investment isn't keeping pace. They're building on a foundation of sand, and it's only a matter of time before it collapses again. Number 2 is California. And look, I know everyone expects California to have grid problems, but the reality is even worse than most people realize. The state has the most aggressive renewable energy mandates in the country, shutting down reliable power plants and betting everything on wind and solar, backed by batteries that don't exist yet. The wildfire situation has turned California's grid into a weapon. When conditions are dry and windy, utilities preemptively shut off power to millions of people to prevent their equipment from starting fires. Think about that. The largest economy in the United States regularly cuts power to prevent catastrophes. That's third world stuff, but it's happening right now in California. Pacific Gas and Electric went bankrupt after their equipment caused fires that killed dozens of people and destroyed entire towns. Now they're so paranoid about liability that they'll cut power at the first sign of wind. These aren't brief outages. People go days without electricity, and this is becoming normalized. Californians are being told to just accept that the grid doesn't work when you need it most. The state's renewable energy has created this insane situation called the duck curve. They generate so much solar power during the day that they sometimes have to pay other states to take it. But when the sun sets and everyone gets home from work, demand spikes right as solar generation drops to zero. The grid has to ramp up other sources incredibly fast, stressing equipment and increasing failure risks. California is also forcing everyone to go electric. Electric vehicles, electric stoves, electric heating, electric everything. They're banning gas appliances while simultaneously admitting the grid can't handle current demand. It's literally insane. They're mandating increased electrical demand while making the supply less reliable. The transmission system in California is ancient and overwhelmed. Many of the main transmission lines were built 60 years ago. They cross mountains, deserts, and forests exposed to every possible threat. Upgrading them would take decades and cost hundreds of billions of dollars. Nobody wants to pay for it, so they just keep patching things and hoping for the best. Water is becoming a massive problem for California's grid, too. Hydroelectric power, which used to provide reliable baseline generation, is becoming unreliable as reservoirs dry up. Some years, hydrogeneration drops by 50% or more. That power has to be replaced by natural gas plants, but California is shutting those down too. It's a death spiral of their own making. And number one, the state most likely to face major blackouts in 2025. It's actually a tie between Texas and California because they're racing each other to grid collapse. But I'm giving the edge to California because at least Texas is trying to build new generation capacity. California is actively dismantling their reliable power while demand explodes. But here's what nobody is talking about. The real number one threat isn't any single state. It's the interconnected nature of our grid. That means failures can cascade across entire regions. Food security becomes critical during extended blackouts. When the power goes out, grocery stores empty within hours. Supply chains fail. Credit card machines don't work. That's why I put together that free guide I mentioned earlier. It shows you exactly how to build a 90-day food supply for $50. Specific items, where to buy them, how to store them properly. It's literally the same system I use for my family. The link is in the description if you haven't grabbed it yet. Water is even more critical than food. Municipal water systems require electricity to operate pumps and treatment facilities. When the grid fails, water pressure drops and contamination becomes risk. Store at least 1 gallon per person per day for a minimum of 2 weeks. Better yet, get a quality water filter that doesn't require electricity. Medical preparedness is overlooked but vital. If you require refrigerated medications, you need a backup plan. If you use medical devices that require electricity, you need battery backups or a generator. Hospitals will be overwhelmed during major blackouts, so you need to be able to handle minor medical issues yourself. Communications become critical when the grid fails. Cell towers have limited battery backup, usually just a few hours. Get a battery-powered or hand-crank radio to receive emergency information. Consider ham radio for two-way communication. Have a plan to connect with family members when phones don't work. Financial preparedness means having cash on hand. When the power goes out, ATMs don't work, credit card machines are dead, and banks may be closed. Having enough cash for 2 weeks of expenses could be the difference between getting what you need and going without. Community resilience multiplies individual preparation. Get to know your neighbors before disaster strikes. Share knowledge, resources, and support. A prepared community is far more resilient than isolated individuals. Consider forming or joining a local preparedness group. Physical security becomes important during extended blackouts. When the lights go out for days, desperate people do desperate things. Make sure your home is secure. Have a plan to protect your family and supplies. This isn't about paranoia. It's about reality. Look what happened in New Orleans after Katrina. Stay informed, but think critically. Government agencies and utilities often downplay grid vulnerabilities to prevent panic, but they also exaggerate their preparedness and response capabilities. Multiple sources of information give you a better picture of reality. Learn skills that don't require electricity. Cooking without power, purifying water, basic medical care, food preservation. These skills become invaluable during extended blackouts. Your knowledge and skills are the only things that can't be taken from you. Have a plan for extreme temperatures. More people die from extreme heat and cold during blackouts than any other cause. If you live in a hot climate, identify the coolest room in your house and have battery-powered fans. In cold climates, have a safe backup heating method and lots of blankets. Document important information on paper. When phones and computers die, you need physical copies of important phone numbers, medical information, insurance policies, and emergency plans. Old-school paper backups could save your life. Consider alternate locations. If your area faces an extended blackout, can you temporarily relocate? Having friends or family in other regions gives you options, but you need to plan this in advance, not when everyone else is trying to leave too. Practice your preparations. Do a practice blackout weekend with your family. Turn off the main breaker and see how well your plans actually work. You'll quickly identify gaps in your preparations that you can fix now rather than discovering them during a real emergency. Stay physically fit. This might sound unrelated, but when elevators don't work, when you're hauling water, when you're managing without modern conveniences, physical fitness becomes critical. The grid makes us soft. Blackouts remind us that physical capability matters. Mental preparedness is just as important as physical supplies. Extended blackouts are psychologically challenging. Boredom, anxiety, uncertainty, they all take a toll. Have books, games, and activities that don't require electricity. Maintain routines to provide stability. Keep vehicles fueled. Gas pumps require electricity. When the grid fails, gas stations close. Never let your tank drop below half full. Consider storing extra fuel safely if possible. Your vehicle might be your only source of power in transportation. Understand that government response will be inadequate. FEMA, National Guard, local emergency services, they'll all be overwhelmed during major grid failures. They might not show up for days or weeks. You need to be your own first responder. Think about special needs in your household. Infants, elderly, disabled family members, pets. They all have unique requirements during blackouts. Formula, medications, mobility aids, pet food. Plan for everyone's needs, not just the adults. Consider your job and income. Can you work without electricity? Will you still get paid if your workplace is shut down for weeks? Having emergency funds and alternate income sources provides a buffer during extended disruptions. Learn from other counts' experiences. Places like South Africa, Lebanon, and Puerto Rico deal with regular grid failures. See what works for them. Adapt their strategies to your situation. Americans think we're immune to third world problems, but our grid says otherwise. The normally bias is your enemy. People assume tomorrow will be like today, that someone else will fix the problems, that it can't really be that bad. That thinking gets people killed during disasters. Accept that major changes are coming and prepare accordingly. Here's the brutal truth. Our electrical grid is a 20th century system trying to meet 21st century demands while facing unprecedented threats. It's not going to make it. The question is whether you'll be ready when it fails. The states I've talked about today are just the tip of the iceberg. Every state faces grid vulnerabilities. Some are just closer to the breaking point than others. But when cascading failures start, geographic boundaries won't matter. This is a national crisis that requires individual preparation because national solutions aren't coming. I've been prepping since 2012, and I've never been more concerned about grid reliability than I am right now. The convergence of threats, the acceleration of problems, the lack of serious solutions, it's all pointing toward major failures in the very near future. This isn't fear-mongering. This is pattern recognition, but here's the empowering part. Every step you take to prepare makes you more resilient. Every skill you learn, every supply you store, every plan you make, it all reduces your vulnerability. You can't fix the grid, but you can absolutely prepare for its failure. Start small if you need to. Even basic preparations are better than nothing, but start now. Don't wait for the first major blackout to be your wake-up call. By then, it's too late. The time to prepare is when the lights are still on. If this information has been valuable to you, please share it with others who need to hear it. The more people who prepare, the more resilient our communities become. Hit the like button if you found this helpful and subscribe so you don't miss future critical updates about what's coming and how to prepare for it. And remember, grab that free guide showing you exactly how to build a 90-day food supply for just $50. It includes everything you need to know about emergency food storage, plus those 37 items most people never think to stockpile. In a grid-down situation, this information could literally save your family. The link is right below in the description. The grid is going to fail. That's not pessimism. That's reality based on all available evidence. The only question is whether you'll be ready when it happens. The choice is yours. The time is now. Stay prepared, stay safe, and remember, the lights won't always be on, but you can always be ready. Thanks for watching.